we'll start this meeting. It's now the right time. We call for any apologies. No apologies. Any conflicts of interest? No conflicts of interest. Confirmation of minutes. Has everybody read them? Moved by. Yeah, Mayor's moved, second by Councillor Blackie. All in favour? Right, carried. Matters arising. That's good. We've got no deputations and presentations. Reports. Got a report 5.1, Colin Roxburgh and Chris Freeman. Craig. Cool. Nearly, yeah.
Thank you. So this is Craig Freeman, for you, those who may not have met him before. So he helped put this report together with me, so that's why he's here as well. So this report is on the quality and compliance of the Council's water supplies for the 2019-20 period. So we get assessed on compliance in the same periods as our financial years. And we recently received the annual compliance report from our drinking water assessors. And we also, the report also provides some information on water quality information and complaints as well for that same period. So in terms of compliance, there's a few different measures that we're reporting on. So the compliance with the Health Act, compliance with the bacterial part of the drinking water standards and the protozoal part of the standards, as well as water safety plans, and then as I said, I'll also talk about water quality and complaints after that. So in terms of the Health Act, this was met for all suppliers. So all water suppliers have certain obligations under the Health Act. I don't think we've ever not been assessed as meeting those, but there was probably a little bit more uncertainty this year with us having water safety plans that we hadn't got reapproved. There was one of the obligations under the Health Act is to have approved water safety plans, but we were still assessed as compliant with the Health Act because we were actively working towards getting approved plans, and we're just in the same position as all other councils where it was taking longer than usual to come up for both us and the assessors to get an understanding of what was required with the new water safety plan framework. So that was good that we were deemed to have met the Health Act. In terms of bacterial compliance, this is achieved by taking the required number of samples at the treatment plants and in the distribution zones, so in the pipework. And so there's a certain number of samples you have to take in maximum days between the samples. You have to use certain days of the week a certain number of times, and then the samples have to be absent of E. coli. So we met this at all but one plant. Early on in the compliance year, there was a sample programmed in a weekend that wasn't taken when it should have been, and it also wasn't picked up soon enough that it hadn't been taken. So we lost the opportunity to take an extra one because the amount of days between samples lapsed. So that since then, because I think that was in July 2019, we've now got a little bit more automation where if someone doesn't enter the data for a sample into the lab book, then it starts generating emails and text messages to people to inform them of that, rather than relying on a person to go and check that and pick that up. So it wasn't good that we missed it, but it was we think we've got better systems in place now to deal with that. And then all the distribution zones we met the bacterial requirements for all of them, so took all the samples we needed to, and they were all absent of E. coli. In terms of protozoa, 9 out of our 12 schemes achieve protozoal compliance. Waikuku Beach achieved it for the first time because you need to have a full 12 consecutive months from July to June where the treatment plant is operating, so that was the first 12-month period where the UV plant had been operating for the full year. Mandeville, we would have expected to have achieved it, but there was one day where it didn't, and that's because the primary well pump failed. So we had to take that pump out. We only have one primary well in Mandeville, so that meant we used our 3 backup wells, and they don't have protozoal treatment. So it was really an issue around redundancy on that scheme, where ideally we would like to, full redundancy in the primary well, so if one fails you can use the other one. And also if we had more storage it would have helped as well. So there might have been an option to run off storage if we'd had more. So there have been projects in the long-term plan for a little while to address that. They just haven't come up yet. So we've got a new storage going in at Mandeville next year, and we've got a second well planned for several years after that. The other scheme to talk about in terms of protozoal compliance, or 2 other schemes. So Garrymere well and upgrade was completed. That was right at the end of June. So in terms of the July to June period, it only operated for the last week of that period, so it couldn't be assessed as compliant until it has a full, until it actually operates for the full period. And then Points Road didn't achieve it because it hasn't had an upgrade yet. So that will be, we'll complete the project this year, but it'll be the year after that it actually is operated for the full year. The other thing I was going to talk about a little bit was water quality trends. So there's some graphs in the report on E. coli presence levels, both in the last year and historically, and also total coliforms, which E. coli you definitely can't have under the standards, because any E. coli is a failure to meet the standards. Total coliforms, there's no maximum level, but they're a sign of some kind of insecurity in the system, so you also don't want total coliforms. So they're assessed just for monitoring and understanding your system, but not strictly for compliance. If you look at the graphs of total coliforms levels, you'll see overall we had about 2% of samples had total coliforms present. That's a little lower than the long-term average of 3.2%. And then drilling into it a little bit more, you can see that the main contributors for total coliforms were cust, which is related to the headworks, which we've talked about more recently. So that I guess it shows the value that the data was telling us there was a problem there. And also the wood end headworks has been a more significant contributor of coliforms than all our other headworks as well. So we've been trying to work through the reason for that. About a year ago we thought it was the manganese biofilm in the system that was almost allowing little colonies of coliforms to live on the walls of the reservoir. So we've got a much better manganese treatment filter now, but we couldn't find a direct correlation between manganese levels and coliform levels. So then more recently we superchlorinated the reservoirs, thinking that maybe it still had that build-up, had always been there, and if we just cleaned it off it would help. And since we've done that, that was only about, I think, 4 months ago or so, so we haven't had that much data yet, but we have had one presence of coliforms since then, so not as much. We used to get about 20 or 30% of samples, but at the same time the problem hasn't gone away entirely like we hoped it would. And we're also conscious of the fact that back in 2012, because I've put in here a history of E. coli events, there was E. coli and wood end that was traced back to the headworks, but I guess that's also a sign that there might have, well, back then there was definitely some kind of insecurity in the system rather than just biofilm or something like that. So what is noted in the report is that we want to do more investigations at wood end, because cust is a good example of what can happen if you start getting coliforms. There can be something else can get in as well. So we're I think the plan is we need to do a bit more investigation, but we might come back to council with a report for some funding for some more extensive sealing of the reservoir. So, but the first step would be, we've been talking to a consultant who's been doing quite detailed assessments of reservoirs in Christchurch because they're working really hard to prove everything in their system is secure. So we're looking at getting the same consultants to do a thorough investigation of the Chinneries Road reservoirs and see what they recommend, and then that would, or may trigger us recommending a larger project, or it may be that they find some things we can kind of seal up on the spot. So yeah, I just thought I'd give a bit of a heads up on that. And the final thing I was going to talk about quickly on this report was the complaint level. So we've got a level of service to have less than 5 complaints per 1,000 connections per year. The last 3 years we've gone from 8.4 to 6.4 to 2019-20 it was 3.2. So the first year we've been less than 5 and about half the previous year. And there's a figure showing that breakdown by scheme, and the biggest improvement has been Wood End, where we used to get quite a few complaints about discoloured water, which have almost stopped now. And also the previous year, I think going back about 2 years, Oxford Rule number 1 was a big contributor with discoloured water from the river. So I think improvements on those 2 schemes is reflected in the complaint levels as well, which is good. So that's all I was going to say on the report, so happy to take any questions.
Got any questions?
Thanks, Colin. It's always fascinating to read your reports. I see on page 35 of Diligent that there were complaints from Kaiapoi and Mandeville Fernside over each quarter of the year. That may be a different page in your system, but it's got the graphs. I just wondered, Kaiapoi is, I would have thought, a very good scheme. I can understand Mandeville Fernside, perhaps. What was the problem or complaints with Kaiapoi?
I have, to be honest, I don't know specifically. I think if we looked at that in terms of, I guess we would expect to see the larger schemes represented more, because there's always going to be some issues sometime, and the more people you have, the more complaints you'd expect. So Kaiapoi, I don't know what those complaints were off the top of my head, but I guess the level of complaints per property is within a normal level for a scheme of that size. I think if you saw our graphs from other years, you'd see Wood End and Oxford number 1 completely dominating, especially if you translated it to per connection. So it's, I'm happy to give specific details later. I could follow up with an email or something, but I can't tell off the top of my head. Yeah.
Councillor Becky?
The alert you sent out was it earlier this week or last week, the tummy bug in Waikuku, there was no correlation with any council supply, nothing came of that at all?
No, we actually were quite fortunate. We'd done a lot of sampling leading up to that, just because we have to do a certain number of Saturday and Sunday samples, and we'd happened to have done the whole weekend then, so we had 4 or 5 days in a row where it had been clear, and that had spanned the whole period where people had got sick. But then, to be extra cautious, we took, on that Tuesday evening, we took a lot more samples at the source, the plant reticulation, and from fire hydrants surrounding the where the illness had been reported, and they were all good as well. So we've talked to community and public health, and they do say there's always a spike at this time of year with in rural areas to do with farming practices. I'm not too familiar, but lambs and ewing and stuff like that, and urban areas with barbecuing and chicken and I don't know, those kind of things. So it's not unexpected to get tummy bugs for reasons other than the water supply, but it was just something we wanted to roll out.
Councillor Barnett?
Water outages. Do you report them in your column or not?
Yes, so
I must have missed it.
we didn't pull that out specifically, but there's a complaint type for loss of supply or pressure, so that is rolled into the complaints.
So the issues at Waikuku Beach with all the cutting out of the generator and things have been resolved?
Yeah, definitely that has been. In last years, I think Waikuku was a little bit overrepresented because of that, but that wasn't in 1920, I think it was just before, it must have been in 1819.
And that's all been resolved?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you. And one for myself. How confident are you with the minimising the risk from human error again in these samples? It's not the first time it's happened, and we're lifted it again then supposedly.
Yeah.
So we're quite confident because that's quite important for our water plan.
Yeah. Yeah, we're a lot more confident now. We've got the last issue was in July 2019, so it's been about 18 months nearly since that happened, and we've it used to be a purely rely on humans picking it up. Now it's we've got a spreadsheet where all the samples get entered at the end of each day, and if they don't, then it starts sending emails and texts. So it's a lot better system now.
Thank you. Have we got a mover? Councillor Blackie. And Councillor Doody can't second that, I'm sorry. You're not on the committee. No, you've moved. Councillor Ward. No. Been changed. No. We got it moved by Councillor Blackie, seconded by Councillor Ward. Nothing to speak? Anything to speak? No. Any other speakers? I picked it up.
I think what this report shows to me is that water is something we do have to keep our finger on. It's not something you can say is all good and do nothing. We do need to monitor it very closely, as I'm sure Colin and his team does, but it highlights it's a very fragile system that can very easily tip over into a problem if we're not careful.
And I'd just like to thank Colin for what he's doing, and I think the report's pretty good, and we've got really good water in their areas, so thank you. Councillor Barnett?
Just a quick comment that this, I think we will have to keep a very close eye on that Woodend reservoir. It's historically it's a reservoir before, and there's been issues with the manganese filter, but it's good to see the improvement in the filter. That is an excellent thing. But the reservoir we've had, I remember back when I lived in that area that we had E. coli before, so that reservoir's always had a little bit of an issue, and we'll have to keep it in.
Right to reply? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Right, so we've got 5-point term. We've got Colin up again.
Hey, thanks. So this report is about the Pegasus water treatment plant biological filter. So this is the one that now treats the water for both Pegasus and Woodend. It presents a summary of findings from an assessment that has recently been carried out by Gary Boot, who probably most of you will know, but he's worked on all our water supplies, but more recently he led the project to join the Woodend and Pegasus schemes and put together the proposal of converting the Pegasus filter from a chemical one to a biological one. And since that's happened, he's had a really close look at the data from it in terms of how well it's performed versus how well we thought it would perform. And it's fair to say it's performed a lot better than the Woodend filter. So no matter what, it's a lot better than the previous system. The thing, and prior to Woodend joining Pegasus, it had been operating as a biological filter for about a year, and during that time its performance had basically been is good. Like all manganese was below detection levels. Since wooding joined, the flows increased, and only in the summer months we started to see the performance of the filter drop on peak days. So it wasn't too often, but it was enough to say that it wasn't performing quite as well as we hoped, because we know that the demand is going to go up on that scheme as Ravenswood occurs and more growth occurs in the area. So following on from that, Gary had a close look into why it wasn't performing as well as we thought it would as flows increased. And there were two key reasons. One was about the depth of the sand in the filters, and one was about the size of the sand particles themselves. So the depth, one filter that had been underperforming had about 300 millimetres less sand than was shown on the as-builts, and then was the optimum depth. So that was quite an obvious thing that wasn't quite as we expected. And the other thing was that the sand size itself, and it's surprising how sensitive it is, but the sand particles average diameter was 0.6 millimetres. If they were 0.9 millimetres, it's actually a lot more efficient, and I'd need Gary here to explain all the science behind it, but I think it's to do with the porosity and how much of the manganese removing bugs can grow in the sand, and you must be able to get a lot more bugs depending on the specific sand size. So and again, it wasn't till we sampled the sand we realised it was slightly different to what we thought. And by contrast, the wood end filter had the larger sand, and when it had been performing well for its size, because it was quite small, it could actually achieve quite a good amount of litres per second per square metres. So it was, although overall it wasn't performing well, for its small size it was actually able to treat quite a lot of water. So that helped. That plus the pilot trials and the other research Gary had done told us that the sand particle size in Pegasus was part of the problem. So there's kind of a two-staged approach taken. The first stage that we've already done is we increased the depth of sand in the one filter that was 300 millimetres too low about a couple of months ago, and that was really in preparation for this summer, because there's more connections now than there was the previous summer as well, so we wanted to get that done sooner rather than later. And we've already started to see improvement so far. So demand has just started to come up recently, and the filters performed well so far, so that's good. But longer term, we are still expecting a lot more demand in the coming years than what we currently have. So there's a recommendation to, at the moment we've got it in year 3 of the budget, to take all the sand out and put in the 0.9 millimetre sand in both filters. That cost is estimated at about $120,000, and that will basically set. Yeah, it's a.
I could get it cheaper off Wood End Beach.
Yeah, yeah. So it has to be. It has to be very hygienic sand. So it's put through a drying process before you buy it, and then it's also. I can't tell you the tonnes without finding the report, but it is quite a volume. And then also the labour to actually work inside a live treatment plant one at a time and take all the other stuff out and get the new stuff in and superchlorinate it and make it all clean is a bit as well. So we're proposing that in year 3. There's a little bit of flexibility in that we can continue, because we've only just done the top up on one filter. We can continue to monitor that quality over this summer and the next summer, and maybe it's going to do a little better than we think and we can push it out, or maybe we'll be chlorinating all our water supplies by then, depending what else happens. So that would, the reason to get better manganese treatment is to minimise biofilm growth, and chlorine would do the same thing. So if we were chlorinating, there'd be an argument that we don't need to do this quite so soon. So that's why one reason we're saying we don't want to do this straight away, and we thought we'd do that interim step in the meantime. But yeah, if we are able to have an unchlorinated supply, and if growth does happen like we're expecting it to, it will be really important for the quality of the water and the aesthetic parameters of the water to do this. It's also noted that we're collecting development contributions from Ravenswood, which are quite substantial, and they would offset this because it's driven by growth. So it's not. That's why we would need to do it. So it would be cost neutral to council to do this because it's allowed for, or headworks upgrades were part of what the development contributions allowed for when they were set. So I think that's all I was going to say on this report, so happy to take any questions.
Yeah, just before questions, I just would like to add a few comments on this, and it's particularly about Gary. This report, we're very fortunate to have Gary working for us. He would, I would say, be the lead expert in New Zealand on biological treatment of water for manganese removal, amongst all of his other skills that I know you know so well. Gary did the design and managed the conversion of the Wood End treatment plant to a biological process going back a long time. He won a Paper of the Year award at the IPWA conference at that time for that work, so that was recognised. When Pegasus was being developed, I'm pretty sure most of you have been to that plant. It's an exceptionally good plant. Gary was right in there making sure that we got a good facility for the council when the developer was designing that. And at that time, it was a chlorine-based chemical treatment process, but Gary actually, through his input, made sure it was designed in such a way that we could convert it to biological process, so he's very far-sighted in that. He then has worked with Alicia Fleck, who's one of our engineers who's just become chartered this year, and on this more recent work, and it's through his mentoring and working on this that's helped him get to that position. So he's converted the Pegasus treatment plant to a biological process. That has given us a much better quality of water, so better manganese removal, and a much more consistent dosing of chlorine. So the complaints have dropped off a lot in Pegasus. And just by the way, this report that Gary has written, he wrote that using iGaze software, which he is like a screen with a whole pile of letters, and he types by looking at individual letters and writing. And this is the feedback is. Most people use this for simple yes/no answers for, do you need me to move you, that kind of thing. Gary's, no one else is using that hardware and software, and he keeps pushing the limits on it, and they have to keep upgrading things. So I just really want to acknowledge the work of Gary over his whole career for the council, and he's continuing to provide us with exceptional work today. So I just thought it's worth making those comments as part of this report.
Got any questions?
My question actually in relation to that, if there was mandatory chlorination, would we still continue with the biological filtering to improve the quality of chlorination?
There is, Gary's done us a big favour, and so he wrote both the covering report but also the technical report that's appended. He's got a set of steps. If it's not chlorinated, then a slightly different set of steps if it is. And I think I know that it's not as high on the priority list. I think there would come a time when it would be needed, but it wouldn't be as soon. So the chlorine would deal with a lot of the biofilm issues, but it would still, as flows get higher and then the filter performance drops more, there'd come a time when you would still benefit from having better manganese removal. So it would just be a matter of timing and priority. So you would still do it, but you might allow a little bit more growth to happen before you did it, or before it was warranted.
And the Ravenswood supply, that is considered part of Wood End, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it is unchlorinated at the moment.
There's actually the reticulation has now got to a point where it's just touching, and there's a closed valve. So actually, a lot of Ravenswood, like the McDonald's in the commercial area, and then extending up, is chlorinated, and then it gets quite far towards Wood End before it switches to unchlorinated.
Right, no more questions? Yeah. Councillor.
Just one, Mr. Chair. I'm not a member of this committee, so I can't move anything, but I just wondered whether you would consider in the recommendation acknowledging the work of Gary Boot, because I think it's pretty fantastic what he does, and it would be great to acknowledge that.
Okay. And by UG, include that, and Moot.
Senior engineering advisor.
He's the senior engineering advisor to the
And I'll second that. Cool.
Just briefly, if I could.
Yes.
I support the report. It's well put together, and it certainly this is something we need to do. So thank you for that. And I have been to Gary's home when we presented him within the ward earlier in the year, and have seen Harry's use this technology, and it's amazing, really. And it's he's an amazing guy, and we are so lucky to still have his services, and it was lovely that he could come a few weeks, seems like it was a few weeks, maybe a month or so back, when we had the Community Service Awards, and were able to acknowledge that amongst others that were also given awards. But he's an exceptional guy who's given an amazing service over a large number of years with water supply upgrades. It's when I first came onto council, was involved in those, and Colin, you've picked up some of Gary's really good practices and how you run the engagement now. But the quality of this reporting that's provided still in that service is so great. We can still have his input and his expertise. So no hesitation in supporting the report.
Thank you. I endorse all that comments, and I think it's imperative we keep on looking and upgrading all of our water supplies, because it's very important in today's standards. Okay, have we got any more speakers? It's moved and seconded. All in favour? I've got it. Passed. Okay. Now we're moving on to 5.3, 108, page 108, and it's Jared and Simon.
I'll just give a very brief introduction, and then Simon can take it away from there. Look, this is a really small report for an absolutely enormous piece of work. This is the 3-year cycle that we work in. Activity management plans are a key plank of our infrastructure strategy and our long-term plan. They pretty much summarise a lot of the work even these reports that are referred to. They are summary documents in themselves of a lot of the work that goes on. So they are definitely a good resource, always a very good go-to. If you've got a question on a scheme, I'd always recommend having a look at the activity management plan. You can get a good understanding and overview, and it's where you get a bit of a look into the machinery that we have working away within our department to make sure that we're giving customers of today the level of service that they need, but also looking at the financial sustainability of the system out into the future, and making sure that we're far-sighted in all of our decision making. But I'll let Simon take it away.
Thanks, Jared. You've said most of what I had planned to say, so my introduction will be perhaps a little bit briefer, but as Jared said, they are important documents, and they're very good reference documents. They will remain in diligent. Each iteration of them will remain in diligent, so they will remain as a reference for the whole period until they're next reviewed. In addition to what Jared said, this report includes a summary of the future challenges for each major activity, and perhaps not surprisingly, the themes that come out there are climate change, which is a thread running through all of the activity areas, and also the water reform. That's clearly a major challenge coming up for the Three Waters area. They also include a snapshot of the costs, comparing the 2018 costs with the draft 2021 costs. Now, those graphs, they are a snapshot and they will be subject to change as the budgets get debated early next year. And in terms of the process, the draft AMPs in their final form will come back to Council in February for formal approval. And then subsequent to that, the final ones will get adopted by Council in June, before the or as part of the LTP adoption. So, any questions?
No questions. I'll move the recommendation. Have we got a seconder? Seconded by the Mayor. No, I think it's all straightforward, so from me.
Same here. Thank you, Simon, for all your work. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No more speakers. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Passed. Thank you. Right. Right, so now we go to page 142, Adelaide Terrace proposed partial stopping, and we've got nobody.
Me, since there's nobody else here, I'll
Jared will
I'll take this one. So really, this is look, it's really relatively procedural. We need to get a recommendation from the UNR committee so that we can go to the council to initiate the process of road stopping. We do have a legislative process that we need to follow that requires that formal approval. This is we're fully in support of progressing this as it coordinates with the agreed development plan for the area. So if the land is to develop in the way that is set out in that plan, it's necessary to have this road closure. Because it is a public process, so it does give people the ability to have their input into it. So I'm happy to take any questions.
No questions? Councillor
Have you
Blackie?
been talking to Pete, Dutch name, Whittimer, and Martin Pinkham? But Pete's been sending Neville and I emails worrying about not so much the closure, but the name. I think he's worried about what his address is going to become and the name of. He said there's a rumour. He's heard that we're changing the name of Adelaide Terrace, which of course we're not. But are you guys in contact with him?
We should be. I haven't personally been involved in any of those discussions, but I will make sure that we follow that up and go back to Pete Whittimer to just confirm exactly what's going on there.
Well, we've got a mover. And we've got a seconder, Councillor Ward.
It really is procedural. Well, in terms of practice, it does need to happen this now to make this effective. We've been through significant process with Lime and others around this now, so it's around just confirming that, and this is just recommending that this now goes to the council, so it's the recommendation. So this will be on the council agenda on Monday if this is agreed by UNR today.
I'll put that. All in favour? Right, passed. Right, we come to portfolio updates. I've got myself first, and there's not really much to about there. Flaxton Road, we've seemed to have got a reasonably pretty good price on the that roading scenario. So apart from that, there's not really much for me to talk about. So we go to drainage and stock water, to Sandra. Stuart.
Some significant things here. We have finally been granted the waimakariri maintenance and minor works drainage consent. All over and done with.
Sorry, we were watching the live stream and we thought, oh, it's okay, so we've got the report started just before us, so we thought we'd better come over. But
No, not yet. Not yet. No.
Okay, I'll continue. We have been granted the long-awaited waimakariri maintenance and minor works consent for drainage and stormwater works. It comes with a few because of the MPS, freshwater and NES. It comes with a few extra demands, I guess, in that how I understand it, and we can probably talk to it, is that individual in-stream works will require, it's not so much a consent or notification, or what does ECAN now require as part of that consent if we're doing in-stream work? Because it's not sort of totally smooth running, is it?
No, there are some, now there's some notifications that we need to provide in advance just to let them know, and it's more consistent with, we have a consent for undertaking spraying as well, so we need to notify them in advance of locations that we will be spraying. So just now we've got a consent for our maintenance works, and we need to notify them in advance of any works we're doing in particular areas. So most of the time we know the drains on an annual basis that we do maintenance works within, and we can notify them well in advance. We just need to get in a process in place for any of the more reactive type maintenance works that we do.
Yes, and it also enables now the Cam River improvement work, the in-stream and sediment trap stuff and bank stuff to go ahead. But because it's taken such a long time to get to this point with this consent, we're going to have to review that program, and I would like it to come back to Land and Water so we can have another look at that in the new year. So that's that one. The other one that Kelly might also want to talk about is that Pond C on the stormwater treatment pond on the Flaxton Fernside corner is breaches of its consent, and this council's working with ECAN about it. We've also had water zone members notice the sediment that's flowing into the, it's not quite pristine, but it certainly hasn't got that sediment level in the waterway itself. So I'd also ask, perhaps Kelly might like to update the committee on what's happening there with that consent and the pond itself.
Sure. So in terms of the non-compliance report that we've received from the Regional Council, the non-compliance relates to reporting, so provision of testing and inspection results. So we are currently working with the Regional Council in terms of collating the information that we do have available and submitting that through. The other aspect that we're working with the Regional Council on is there has been some discussions regarding our application for our network discharge consent for Rangiora, and more recently the processing officers have suggested that Pond C consent remains separate to the Rangiora network discharge consent. Now, from our perspective, we do not want that, because the Pond C consent is probably one of our most complex consents. It's got about 62 conditions, and some of them are so onerous that, and practically they're difficult to actually to actually give effect to. So we are going back to the Regional Council and seeking that it still is captured within the Rangiora network discharge consent, but that we identify it as one of our major discharge points. So that effectively means that at the Pond C discharge point there will be additional frequency as well as a range of contaminants that we actually test for. We actually want to make sure we do have consistency across all of our network discharge consents and don't end up with the Regional Council kind of picking and choosing what's in and what's out. So we've done a lot of work to make sure we do have conditions that capture everything, and we can actually just recognise if there are catchments, discharge points they've got particular concerns with, we can highlight them as a major discharge point that we focus on in a bit more detail. So that approach is what we're using for Kaiapoi as well, and they have accepted that in Kaiapoi, so we're hoping they'll accept that in Rangiora. In terms of the murky water, so that has been an ongoing issue there, and we're using a two-prong approach to address that. First of all, looking at what works we can do within the pond itself. So there's been reports of die-off of plants in the past, as well as the birds in the pond itself just stirring up and agitating any of the sediment. We were hopeful that we would have been able to do some planting to improve some of the areas that have died off. What we've actually found is that the water level in relation to the ground level within the pond is different to what was designed. So we couldn't actually use the plants we would thought we could use were actually plants that were just on the margins. So we're actually looking at trying to put in some plants that are more suited for within the water itself. And Sophie is looking at doing a trial relating to that. Also, the planting is looking to put in areas where, just to move ducks out of the area or make it less likely that they'll be in that area. So if there is any stirring up of sediment occurring within the pond, that it doesn't make its way through to the outlet itself. The other prong that we're taking in there is actually working with the landowners in the upstream catchment and making sure their on-site practices are robust, such that there's not a high amount of sediment loading into the pond. One of the challenges that we have is because a lot of the catchment area is gravelled, you get that finer sediment that you do coming off gravel that's put in to those areas, and that usually happens for maybe the first 2 to 5 years. And then that gets washed off, but then we've got the problem of it being in our pond as well. So it's a two-prong approach. What can we do within the pond itself, and what can we do with landowners in terms of their on-site practices?
Thank you. Got a question from Councillor Blackie.
And Opel Kelly, the definition of in-stream work, and does that apply to streams and drains, both? And what are you defining as in-stream work? Like if a branch falls into a tree, falls into a creek, on a farm, is the farmer going to have to notify ECAN to take it out? Is that in-stream work? Is Michael whipped in to do a minor maintenance? Is that going to have to? Is the paperwork going to be overwhelming?
I hope that it will not be. And there's probably still a degree of bidding in to find out, what is actually going to need to be notified. It's not intended to capture private work at the moment, although if there is certain type of private work being undertaken, we've already signalled that there will be a mechanism for them to, via the council, undertake the works under our consent. But effectively, it's only going to be works where, the bed itself is actually being disturbed. So the example you gave of vegetation falling into a waterway needing to be removed wouldn't need to be notified under the consent. Hopefully.
Yeah. Can I just ask a question?
Councillor Doody.
I just find this a bit crazy that you've got to try and remove bird life from a water source. I mean, what part of do they not understand? Birds go to water and they don't care where they go to. Yeah, but you're never going to stop them from going in there.
You're right, you're not going to stop it, but as part of how we design our stormwater management areas, knowing that birds are going to come into these areas, we need to make sure that they don't, particularly where the water zone is, if it's quite shallow, that's where, because you're going to have birds in there, that's when, if it's shallow, they are going to disturb the base of the pond. So the design and the operation of the pond is important to make sure that any birds, wildlife that's in there is not going to stir up any silt. So you're not going to stop it, but you can actually through how you design and operate it, minimise the effects of the wildlife coming into the area.
There's, I guess, an urban-rural interaction about who is contributing most to
Maybe
contamination of our streams. The zone committee is particularly focused on pond C. So, and as Kev said, we have issues with it. So that, unless you've got any more questions, I'll just move on to the other thing in my update, which is that because of the NPS, freshwater and NES, and the implications for operating our drainage network and any work we're doing, particularly in the rural area, I've suggested that we have a combined rural groups, the rural drainage groups meeting next year, where the council can explain what the new regulations require and also talk about the council's approach to fulfilling what those regulations require. Because as you've identified, or it may come clear to you, that there are restrictions now on a lot of work that private owners may want to do and won't be able to do. And the council, as Kelly has said, whether this network consent and now enables them to come in under the umbrella of the council. And you would appreciate also that any rehabilitation works that anyone might want to do to an area, a waterway, has now requirements that we may need to, in fact, sponsor work under our consent, because it's taken 5 years, effectively, from Road to Go to get this consent. And the imposition on private landowners to do, rehabilitation work in these streams is enormous. So having, and in addition, the natural waterways requirements, which have the drainage staff have already hit with landowner pushback, and just how the council's going to approach all that under this new MPS. So earlier in the new year, a combined rural drainage group meeting that I think everybody, certainly on this committee, should have an invite to and come along, because they are significant changes, and we're going to get, we're going to be at the forefront of getting pushback from landowners.
Thank you. Report for myself on utilities and waters. We've just had the final sort of for the year meeting at Points Road, and everything seems to be going quite good. Everybody came out of the meeting very, very happy, which was might have been a wee bit of a surprise to Kelly and Colin, but I think the way it was presented has been actually brilliant. So all the parties have seemed quite happy on there. I'm particularly happy with the way Colin and her staff did proaction with the Waikuku when they heard a wee bit of rumour on local media that there may have been some bugs around the area of the water supply. So getting onto that very quickly was, taking the extra sampling and all that was, I was quite impressed with that. So I'd like to thank the staff for organising that. That's it for me on that. Solid waste, Councillor Bryan's not here, so we've got nothing there. So we've got I'll let Kelly answer that one. It's
In terms of the funding approach, that will be at the end of January as part of deliberations as part of the draft. Yes, so that's part of the stimulus package to agree in terms of the 168,000 to be addressed. So that will be end of January that council will consider that. Our next steps are to write regarding the other outstanding issue, which is the remaining 12 19 unit connections on the scheme. So we are writing to them, and at the meeting earlier this week, at the Points Road meeting earlier this week, they endorsed a approach where we will write to the 12 19 unit landowners and say that they need to look at reducing down their units from 19 down to at least 8 or less, and that their right to the units will be grandfathered. So if they do develop their property, then they will be entitled to the units without paying a DC. But that right will effectively cease when the property is sold. So it only remains with the existing property owner. So we have signalled that depending on where that lands might actually alter the rates slightly. So if all of those 12 go down to 2 units, then that is going to change what we're predicting at the moment. We're effectively assuming that those remaining 12 will go down to 8. So that's the next step, and the outcome of that will be reported through to UNR, I understand. So.
Thank you. And my apologies, I've just found a wee note, there is an apology from Councillor Bryan today, so if we can include that in apologies. Solid and waste, I'd just like to bring up something on behalf of Robbie. For the recycling, we're getting a lot of flack and all that, everybody going through it. It is actually starting to improve. There have been quite a few bins apparently that have been rejected, and they've never been put out since, so they're keeping an eye on those, so they're waiting for them to reappear. So I think we have 4 collections past some of these people so far, and their bins haven't come back out again, so they are keeping an eye on that and see what happens. Right, we'll go to transport. Got Mayor Dan Gordon.
Thanks. Well, a lot of the, firstly, really pleased that the Northern Corridor is open, and thanks for those who are able to join the opening on Saturday. I thought it was really a really good opening, actually, and it was nice that Nai Tuhariri joined us at that particular opening. Got a few lines away to the Minister, as some people know, around the Woodend bypass, so looking forward to a sod turning at some stage. We had a meeting with the Minister after, with the Greater Christchurch partners, to discuss transport issues more broadly for Canterbury, including all the options we've been working through around mode shift and those others. It's very clear that the government's priority will be around decarbonisation. And so any plan that's put forward around roading is going to need to meet that criteria. We've got a bit of work as a partnership to do in that space, but I think it was a really good start to show that we're joined up, that we are actually thinking about those things, and that certainly I invited the Minister to come back on a regular cycle to meet, because it's really important that we do, and he seemed open to doing that. So transport issues for not only our district but also for Greater Christchurch area and Canterbury are really important. There is going to be, as part of the Mayoral Forum, there's going to be a visit to the ports, airport and to Timaru to see how transport functions operate. That'll happen in February, and an invitation has been extended to the Minister if he would like to join that visit, and that's to see how all those modes are operating. I'm really encouraged with Kiwi Rail. They've reached out a number of times now, certainly around the level crossing incident, but are keen to build a closer relationship with our council, and that follows on from a conversation at Zone 5 and 6 when they presented, and it was a good presentation. I spoke to the representative after that. Our engagement with NZTA, not NZTA, but with Kiwi Rail hasn't always been as positive as it could be. And look, I'm meaning not in terms of our staff yet, but in terms of the amenity things that we want to see improve, like here in Rangiora, where there's for example, a level crossing, and the community's desire and to see that improved and to work on that, they haven't always been forthcoming or helpful. It's very clear that is with this gentleman's appointment. I can't remember his name, it'll come to me in a minute. He's really keen to, and he's got the directive that they're to build a much better relationship. So that's positive from that side, and he wants to meet in the new year, so that's really good. Lots of things going on in the transport space. I don't need to tell you because you're on, will know about those, but I'd just like to acknowledge Paul as the roading portfolio holder. We meet regularly with Jared, Joanne and Carl to try and keep on top of the things that are important in our area, and I'm really appreciative of how responsive our staff are in turning around where we have issues raised, and so I personally find that a really good working relationship. So that could be passed on to the staff, Jared, appreciation for how they're working, and with a really high workload in that area. As we all know, we're all amateur roading engineers, we all have opinions in that space. Managing that's always a bit of a challenge, but I think personally our roading staff are really stepping up, as is the contractor and Cycon, and really want to see an improved level of service. So it's good as we go into the new year that we've started the year, I think, on a bit of a positive. It's not a positive that we've had the number of road fatalities that we have ahead, and it's a real concern. Don't know quite what the driver for that is, but obviously there's a lot of stress, all sorts of factors going on at the moment, and obviously people just need to take their care out there on our roads, because we don't want to see that a continuing trend. It's not something we want to see at all. Thanks, team.
And we've got a yes.
Obviously, we've had a new bus with individuals going to running order. Do you know when we were discussing level of service for the bus stops and things like that? But it's noting that there was quite a big way to go from choosing it as a bus stop, and there's no shade that's really what the level of service is.
Maybe Jeffy's
just the timing of when we're going to get updated. So are we going to do a bit of a priority list around our can you talk to a microphone, please?
Yeah.
Sorry, which one did you mention?
Outside Charles Up and the
Oh yes, yeah, sure, yeah. So yeah, we do have some shelters in stock that we are hoping to roll out this before the end of the financial year. We do need to do some prioritisation around where they go, and we normally base that on patronage, obviously taking into account some of our new stops though. But there is a large package of work around to do with the travel demand management business case. That is the wider Canterbury work, which has allocated quite a lot of funding, or requested quite a lot of funding for bus stop improvements, infrastructure improvements. So that will be rolled out over the next. I'm looking at Jared because he's.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Look, you will actually get some specific commentary from Joanne in the LTP budget. So there has been that traffic demand management piece of work done at a regional level, and that puts a recommendation up. We've taken that recommendation and considered it along with other priorities. So there's an allocation that's suggested in that strategy, and we've actually got in our budgets that we've worked through, we do have some figures in there going out over 10 years. They don't match. They're currently in the budgets that don't match what those recommendations are, but we are actually specifically bringing that to you. So the council will have its opportunity to consider whether the level of funding that staff have proposed is in line with what your expectations are, or whether you wish to resolve something different. We have, I'm pretty sure in the first year we've taken a bit of a pause because it actually takes Kathy quite a lot of time to get some of these things set up, but then from year 2 onwards that there's an annual budget allowance in the LTP.
It's to come. It has been discussed. In fact, when we go down there in February, we're going to. But there has been certainly it was raised the other day around the desire to see that trialled further. But we'll just see. There's not a response to that. Kathy, on the Charles Upham site, from my point of view, you don't have to. I would see that as a priority to get a bus covered stop down there with the number of residents that there are, and also yes. But it would be, in terms of priority for me, I guess that others will need to consider that, but it would be a priority to see shade. Also, every time I go to Charles Upham, I'm asked around the bus service and that, so they do want to use it, which is great.
Sure. And I would just say it's probably an easier one to get a shelter in because there's no immediate neighbours, and as you know, we have to go through a process. People can object to a shelter, and we have to have a hearing. So certainly one, it is on the list.
Thank you. I've got a bit of an update from Jared.
Thank you. This is my portfolio update. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I thought I'll just take a moment, if you please bear with me. It's been an exceptional year, very unprecedented, and I just want to firstly acknowledge the support of the Utilities and Roading Committee for staff and the broader council. We've had to be very adaptable throughout the year, and it's been really good to know that we've been able to make the decisions that we have with the support of our elected members. But mostly, I just want to acknowledge the staff within the UNR department, and I will go through a list. I just, top of mind, listed a whole pile of things that have happened this year, that we've done this year, that are over and above what we had planned to do when we started the year, or what we do in a normal year. So we've established the Trade Services Panel, which goes a long way, I think, in terms of our procurement. Just the way everyone got up and worked so productively from home with COVID. One day we were in the office working at 100%. The next day everyone was at home working at 100%, and it didn't slow down. We managed, the staff managed our contracts successfully, and I think we were again stood out amongst other councils. Contractors, we were proactive. Variation claims were fair and managed, whereas I think other entities who might not have been so onto it probably exposed themselves to quite substantial claims from contractors. We kept all our essential services going through the COVID shutdown phases. The solid waste service contracts in terms of all of the communications through the various levels, and then again the contamination issue that we've had. Touch wood, we've got a $10 million plus roading CapEx program that we're actually on track to deliver, and some of those have been really, really challenging to get to the point we've got there. We secured $9 million of government funding for shovel ready for the community. We've geared up and we've got a program in place to deliver that. Subdivision workload has just really ramped up recently. We've actually been through quite a few iterations of the budget, so you'll recall we had to actually re-look at our annual plan budgets to respond to the economic impact of COVID, and then again at the moment we're going through a lot of work on the LTP budgets to try and deliver you something that's going to be acceptable to the community. You saw the activity management plans come through today. That's a 1 and a 3 year part of the cycle. We also are initiating the $10.3 million water stimulus funding from the government. Well, 9 million of that is from the government. And actually getting together this, there's been a lot of work from staff to bring the council a program of work with an equitable funding allocation that we thought was going to be acceptable to elected members in the community, which also includes consideration development contributions. The Three Waters, the information request we're doing at the moment, we're on program to deliver that. Just to give you an idea, there's 67 worksheets, Excel worksheets involved in that, over 1,000 questions. And we've just yesterday been identified by LGNZ as one of a small handful of councils to be star performers in terms of the progress on that RFI workbook, as well as the quality and comprehensiveness of the data entered. Retaining our AA rating, that excellence program has got a large focus on the services within UNR and our asset management. I know I do acknowledge it's a full council thing, but that was a great achievement this year. We successfully tendered and awarded the road maintenance contract, and we're on program to deliver our last water supply upgrade to the drinking water standards, which again is an exception. And you would have seen an email I sent about the AMIS project. So I just really want to acknowledge the staff within my department. They've worked really hard this year, and I think it's worth a comment on that.
Thank you.
I would just, well, and others may wish to comment, Jura, but that's an amazing level of achievements. You and the team are working extremely hard, and I know there's a number of the staff working exceptionally long hours and are really, I think, looking forward to Christmas, as a number of us are actually this year. But right across our organisation, it's just the amazing workload that's been done, and a lot of it during the lockdown period. So your leadership of the team is phenomenal, and the workload that's going on there deserves our full thanks. This week, Jim and I did send out a communication to staff to thank them for their contribution, and as we had discussed, have awarded an additional day's leave to just recognise all those achievements that are being undertaken. The LGEP Excellence Program, which, you know, in itself is a major feat, plus all that extra workload. It was just a small way of recognising from us our thanks for all that work. So please pass on to your team our thanks, because doing exceptional work.
Yeah, and I'd like to endorse all the thanks to from my portfolio members. They've been keeping me informed all the time, sometimes very much after hours, and it's been appreciated to be kept up to date with everything. So thank you. Joan.
Thank you. Yes, I greatly admire all the hard work and seeing the hard work and the challenges that you've actually accepted, and the humongous workload. I have to say, and the finished result, a lot of people have commented to me about the surface of Ivory Street that's just been completed, and how people are now actually using that access way out, and are very appreciative of the fine surface that's been done to finish off that project. As well as, I think it was another one, is it down Johns Road, somewhere down there as well. People have commented. Westbelt. It's all right. No, it's lovely to see the great improvement, and after, you know, when we've debated the final plans and to see it finished and see it working really, really well is really satisfying. So big thank you, but Jared and Kelly and all your team, you know, we admire you greatly. Thank you. Have a happy Christmas.
Okay. Right, so Councillor Barnett.
The only thing I'd like to add is that the technical skills are superb, but what I've seen this year is a culture shift in terms of the people facing skills. I've really seen a step up there where the people actually letting the customers know really, really well what's going on and how it's going on. I've really appreciated that because I think that's often the hardest thing when you're a technical expert is to then translate it to us critical layers to understand what's going on. And I think there's been a huge shift in that area in the last 2 years.
Councillor Doody.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate everything that's been done. I'm sorry I'm actually not on the committee anymore, but I really appreciate the workload that's been with you. And I'd just like to say from that Points Road meeting the other day, the shift and change in attitude for the staff was not because of the staff, but because of the committee, that were quite negative and aggressive over things. To have them like quite so mellow as they have was a huge, and it was just really thanks very much to the staff that it was achieved. It was incredible, and for that it'll go forward and be a well established water body. It's great.
Thank you. Right, so we've got no questions on standing orders, no urgent general business, so we'll move into somebody to move into public excluded.